He sat alone, ignored, at the far corner table of the Monarch. 43 minutes had passed since he'd walked through those ornate doors in his faded beige t-shirt and worn jeans. The waiter, Sebastian, according to his polished name tag, had swept past him 7 times now, serving guests who'd arrived long after him. The crystal chandeliers cast judgmental shadows across his simple clothes. Whispers and sideways glances from other diners cut through the ambient piano music. A woman in pearls at the next table leaned toward her companion and murmured something that made them both snicker while looking in his direction. He traced a finger along the edge of the empty water glass that no one had bothered to fill. His calloused hands, hands that most would never guess had performed miracles, rested quietly on the white tablecloth. Sebastian glided past again, this time slowing just enough to say, "We're quite busy tonight, sir. I'll be with you. Eventually." The deliberate pause said everything the words didn't. The maitre d' kept glancing over, clearly regretting his decision to allow this underdressed man into the establishment at all. Earlier, he'd asked with thinly veiled disdain, "Do you actually have a reservation?" When confirmed, he'd guided him to this hidden corner, far from the windows and important guests. What none of them knew, not Sebastian, not the pearl-wearing woman, not the maitre d', was who they were really ignoring. They couldn't see past the humble clothing to recognize the man whose work had been featured in medical journals worldwide. They had no idea what would happen tomorrow when his new neurological procedure would be announced to the world. He checked his watch. Almost an hour now. His empty stomach growled, but something else was building inside him. Not anger, but a familiar feeling. The same quiet dignity that had carried him through years of being underestimated. He'd long ago stopped, expecting people to see beyond appearances. But tonight was different. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. He took a deep breath and stood up. Every head in the nearby tables turned. The maitre d' took a half step forward, perhaps expecting him to leave. Instead, he straightened his shoulders. The room had no idea what was about to happen. No one could have predicted the chain of events that would unfold when this simple man decided he'd been invisible long enough. Neither the hushed conversations nor the clinking silverware could drown out the words he was about to speak. Words that would make every table in the Monarch fall completely silent. Daniel Matthews wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention when he entered a room. His colleagues often joked that for someone who had revolutionized pediatric neurosurgery, he moved through the world with the quiet footprint of a ghost. As he stood there in the Monarch, his eyes swept across the restaurant, not with anger, but with a contemplative gaze that had assessed thousands of impossible medical situations and found solutions where others saw only dead ends. Daniel had grown up in a small town where his father repaired farm equipment and his mother taught second grade. The hands that now held the finest surgical instruments had once been covered in motor oil and dirt, helping his father on weekends. Those early lessons in mechanics had given him a unique perspective on the human brain, viewing it not just as an organ, but as the most complex machine ever created. When Daniel first expressed his dream of becoming a neurosurgeon, his high school counselor had laughed. "Be realistic," she'd said, glancing at his worn clothes and calloused hands. But Daniel had never forgotten his mother's words that night. "The size of your dreams isn't determined by the size of your wallet." 15 years later, Dr. Daniel Matthews graduated at the top of his class from medical school, with 3 published papers, already changing how surgeons approached pediatric brain abnormalities. Still, he drove the same second-hand truck and wore clothes until they wore out, not from necessity anymore, but from a genuine disinterest in material displays. What truly set Daniel apart in the medical field was his approach to children with rare neurological conditions. While other specialists saw cases, Daniel saw children. He remembered every name, every favorite color, every stuffed animal that accompanied them to consultations. Perhaps his greatest achievement was founding the NeuroCure Foundation 5 years ago. After witnessing too many families bankrupted by medical bills or told their children's conditions were inoperable, Daniel created a non-profit that provided cutting-edge neurological care to children, regardless of their family's financial situation. The foundation operated on a radical principle. Any child with a neurological condition that traditional medicine had given up on deserved a second chance. Using techniques Daniel had pioneered, techniques that combined his mechanical intuition with surgical precision, the foundation had already helped over 3,000 children worldwide. One case had particularly shaped Daniel's life and work. 4-year-old Sophia Reyes had been born with a rare neural pathway malformation that prevented signals from reaching her legs. 8 renowned surgeons had declared her condition permanent. When her parents brought her to Daniel, Sophia had already accepted she would never walk. Daniel spent 3 months developing a new microsurgical approach specifically for Sophia. The procedure required creating specialized instruments that didn't exist yet, which Daniel designed himself, remembering how his father had often modified farm tools to solve unique problems. The day Sophia took her first steps, 6 months after, surgery was the day Daniel's foundation received its biggest donation from Sophia's parents, who'd mortgaged everything they owned to help other children receive the same chance. That breakthrough procedure had earned Daniel numerous awards and recognition within the medical community, though he'd sent a colleague to accept each one in his place. His focus remained not on accolades, but on refining his techniques to help more children. What no one at the Monarch could see was that Daniel had chosen tonight of all nights to dine alone for a reason. Earlier that day, the medical board had unanimously approved his newest surgical protocol, one that would make treatment accessible to children with even more complex neurological conditions. Lives that had been written off as hopeless would now have a path forward. Daniel had wanted one quiet moment to himself to mark the occasion, to honor the journey. He'd chosen the Monarch not for its exclusivity, but because 5 years ago, while having coffee at the building that previously occupied this space, he'd sketched the first draft of the surgical technique on a napkin, a technique that would eventually become the foundation of his most important work. The world had a peculiar way of looking past Daniel. Medical conferences often mistook him for maintenance staff. New nurses regularly asked him to leave restricted surgical areas, not realizing he was the department head. Once, a hospital benefactor had handed him car keys, assuming he was the valet. Daniel had never corrected these misconceptions with indignation. Instead, he saw them as a filter that separated those who judged by appearances from those who recognized substance. The people worth knowing, he'd found, were those who treated everyone with equal respect. The Monarch restaurant was proving to be no different. As Daniel continued standing at his table, not yet speaking, a subtle shift began in the atmosphere. A silver-haired man at a nearby table had been watching the situation unfold with growing interest. He'd noticed the waiter's deliberate neglect, observed the maitre d's condescension, and now studied Daniel with increasing attention. The man tilted his head slightly, recognition dawning in his eyes. He whispered something to his dining companion, who turned to look at Daniel with widening eyes. Sebastian, the waiter, had finally noticed Daniel standing and approached with visible annoyance. "Sir, if there's a problem with your table, there's no problem with the table," Daniel replied quietly. "But it's been nearly an hour, and I haven't even been offered water. As I mentioned, we're very busy." Sebastian's tone was clipped, dismissive. "Perhaps another establishment would better suit your expectations." The silver-haired man at the nearby table suddenly pushed back his chair and stood. The sound drew attention throughout the dining room. He was impeccably dressed, clearly someone accustomed to the finer things. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority. "I don't believe you know who you're speaking to," he said to Sebastian, though his eyes remained fixed on Daniel. "I've been watching this disgraceful display all evening." The restaurant fell quieter as more diners tuned into the developing scene. Sebastian's expression flickered between confusion and concern. The silver-haired man took 3 deliberate steps toward Daniel, then stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. "So you probably don't remember me, Dr. Matthews. I'm Richard Thompson. My son Lucas was patient number 17 at your foundation." The name registered immediately for Daniel. Lucas Thompson had come to them with a cerebellar arteriovenous malformation, so complex that 3 hospitals had declared it inoperable. The boy had suffered debilitating headaches and seizures that kept him from attending school or enjoying any normal childhood activities. After Daniel's procedure, Lucas not only recovered, but eventually became captain of his high school swim team. The Thompson case had been one of the Foundation's early successes, a proof of concept that had helped secure crucial funding. "Of course I remember Lucas," Daniel said, his voice warming with genuine affection. "How is he doing at Stanford?" Richard Thompson's eyes glistened. "Thriving, studying neuroscience because of you. He wants to join your team someday." By now, every table within earshot had gone completely silent. Sebastian stood frozen, the blood draining from his face as the reality of whom he'd been ignoring began to sink in. It's not every day you get to thank the man who saved your child's life, Thompson continued, louder now, intentionally making sure others could hear, especially when that man happens to be one of the most brilliant neurosurgeons in the world. Whispers rippled across the restaurant. The woman with pearls who had been snickering earlier now looked mortified. The maitre d' had emerged from his podium, hovering uncertainly at the edge of the unfolding scene. A quiet transformation was occurring throughout the monarch. The invisible man in the beige t-shirt was becoming visible, truly visible. For the first time since he'd walked through the door, the restaurant had fallen into complete silence. Every eye was fixed on the simple man in the beige t-shirt, the man they had all overlooked and dismissed. Richard Thompson turned to address the room, his voice steady with quiet emotion. For those of you who don't recognize him, this is Dr. Daniel Matthews. 3 years ago, my son was given 6 months to live. Every specialist said his condition was terminal. His voice caught for a moment before he continued. Today, my son is studying neuroscience at Stanford because of this man. Daniel shifted uncomfortably under the attention. This wasn't what he had come here for. His gaze met Sebastian's, the waiter now standing completely still, napkin clutched, in white-knuckled hands. Dr. Matthews doesn't just treat the untreatable, Thompson continued. He founded the NeuroCure Foundation, which has saved thousands of children without charging their families a penny. Children who had been told they would never walk, talk, or live past their 10th birthday. A woman at a corner table suddenly stood up, tears streaming down her face. My niece Lily, she said, her voice breaking. You operated on her last year. She had the seizure disorder that no one could diagnose. Daniel remembered Lily, a bright 8-year-old who collected rocks and could name every constellation. Her unusual form of epilepsy had baffled neurologists across 3 countries. She's back in school now, the woman continued. She's learning piano. An older gentleman at another table slowly rose to his feet. I serve on the board at Mercy Children's Hospital. We've been following your work for years, Dr. Matthews. Your new surgical protocol, it was approved today, wasn't it? That's why you're here? Daniel nodded, finally finding his voice. Yes, the board gave final approval this morning. We'll be able to help children with even more complex conditions now. The maitre d' had made his way to Daniel's table, his earlier disdain replaced with mortification. Dr. Matthews, I had no idea. Please accept our most sincere apologies for the unacceptable... Wait, from the kitchen doorway, a tall man in an executive chef's jacket emerged. He moved with purpose through the stunned restaurant until he reached Daniel. I'm Anthony Reeves, the owner of the Monarch. What's happened here tonight is unforgivable. Daniel raised his hand slightly. No harm done. I didn't come here for special treatment. Then why did you choose our restaurant tonight of all nights? Reeves asked. Surely there are more prestigious places for such an important celebration. A small, contemplative smile crossed Daniel's face. 5 years ago, this building was a coffee shop called Brewer's. I was sitting in a corner booth when I first sketched the surgical approach that eventually became the foundation of our work. It seemed fitting to come back to where it started. The revelation sent another wave of whispers through the restaurant. Reeves looked stunned. That was you. We have that napkin framed in my office. When we bought this building, the previous owner told us some doctor had drawn a breakthrough medical procedure here. We kept it as a piece of the building's history. This moment of connection seemed to break the tension. People began moving from their tables toward Daniel. Some wanted to shake his hand, others just wanted to be near him. In the span of minutes, the invisible man had become the center of the universe at the Monarch. As the crowd gathered, Daniel caught sight of Sebastian slipping away toward the kitchen, shame evident in every line of his body. Excuse me, Daniel said, gently making his way through the well-wishers. He followed Sebastian through the swinging doors, finding him leaning against a prep table, head bowed. I came to make sure you're okay, Daniel said quietly. Sebastian looked up, his face a mask of confusion and embarrassment. You're checking on me? After how I treated you? You didn't know who I was. That's the point, isn't it? Sebastian replied, his voice hollow. I shouldn't have treated anyone that way, regardless of who they are. Daniel considered this for a moment. True, but now you have a chance to remember that lesson. Before Sebastian could respond, the kitchen doors swung open again. Richard Thompson entered, followed by Anthony Reeves and several other diners. Dr. Matthews, Reeves said, we'd be honored if you would allow us to host a fundraising event for your foundation. Right here. Black tie optional. He smiled. Very optional in your case. For a moment, Daniel hesitated. The spotlight had never been comfortable for him. He preferred the focused quiet of the operating room to the noise of public acclaim, but he thought of the children who could be helped by additional funding, of the families who had nowhere else to turn. "I'd be happy to," he finally agreed. As they left the kitchen together, Daniel paused to address everyone who had gathered. The moment felt important, something beyond just clearing up a misunderstanding. "Before we all get back to dinner," he said, "I want to thank Richard for his kind words, but I also want to make something clear." He looked around the room, meeting curious eyes. "What I do isn't extraordinary because of who I am. It's extraordinary because we live in a world where treating everyone with dignity, regardless of what they can do for us, has become the exception rather than the rule." He gestured toward his simple clothing. "I wear what's comfortable. I drive an old truck, not as some kind of statement, but because those things just don't matter much to me. What matters is that we see each other, really see each other, beyond the wrapping." The silence that followed felt different from the awkward tension earlier. It carried weight, reflection. "Now," Daniel said with a gentle smile, "I believe I was promised dinner." A collective chuckle broke the solemnity, and guests began returning to their tables. As Daniel was escorted to a new table, the best in the house, he noticed something had fundamentally shifted in how people looked at him, not with the awe of discovery, but with something closer to genuine respect. If you've enjoyed this story so far, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful lessons just like this one. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload that might just change your perspective. The evening at the Monarch transformed into something no one had anticipated. Owner Anthony Reeves personally oversaw Daniel's table, bringing out the chef's special creations that weren't even on the menu. Nearby diners kept glancing over with newfound respect, some still visibly processing how thoroughly they had misjudged the man in the beige t-shirt. Sebastian, the waiter, had requested to continue serving Daniel's table, a request Daniel had quietly approved. The young man's entire demeanor had changed. His previous condescension had been replaced by authentic attentiveness, not from fear or obligation, but from what appeared to be a genuine reappraisal of his values. "The chef prepared this specifically for you," Sebastian said as he carefully set down a beautifully plated dish. His hands trembled slightly. He said it reminded him of something his grandmother used to make, simple ingredients prepared with care. Daniel smiled. "Please thank him for me." As the meal progressed, Richard Thompson joined Daniel at his invitation. Their conversation drifted from Lucas's progress at Stanford to the broader implications of Daniel's newly approved surgical protocol. "No," Thompson said, swirling the wine in his glass. "When Lucas was sick, we saw 12 specialists before you. The hospitals were beautiful. The doctors wore expensive suits. Their offices were filled with awards. We thought that meant they were the best." He set his glass down. "But none of them could see beyond their training, beyond what they'd been taught was possible." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Medicine sometimes suffers from the same problem as this restaurant. We focus too much on packaging." From across the room, the woman who had spoken about her niece Lily approached the table. She introduced herself as Catherine Winters, a professor of ethics at the local university. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, "but I wanted to ask you something that's been on my mind since my niece's surgery." "Please," Daniel gestured to an empty chair. "You could have built a private practice that catered to the wealthy. You could charge whatever you wanted for your expertise." Her eyes were intensely curious. "Instead, you created a foundation that treats children regardless of their family's ability to pay. Why?" Daniel considered her question, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "When I was in med school, I treated a boy named Marco. His family had sold everything they owned and still couldn't afford the full treatment he needed. I watched him deteriorate because of financial barriers, not medical ones." His voice remained steady, but his eyes revealed the weight of the memory. "I promised myself that if I ever developed treatments that could help children like him, money would never be the reason they didn't receive it." Catherine nodded, satisfied with his answer. As she returned to her table, the maitre d' approached. Still clearly uncomfortable. "Dr. Matthews, there's a call for you at the front desk." "A Dr. Elena Matthews?" Daniel's expression brightened immediately. "My wife. I should take that." At the front desk, Daniel took the phone. "Elena, you won't believe what's happening here." Elena's warm laughter came through the line. "Actually, I might. It's all over social media already. Renowned neurosurgeon in regular clothes ignored at the Monarch. There are posts from at least 6 different diners." Daniel groaned. That's not what tonight was supposed to be about. No, but maybe it's what needed to happen, Elena replied. Your work deserves recognition, Daniel, not just in medical journals that no one outside the field reads. When Daniel returned to the dining room, he found Anthony Reeves waiting with several other patrons who had organized an impromptu planning committee for the fundraising event. We're thinking next month, a woman in a business suit explained. I work in event planning and could have everything arranged within 3 weeks. And I know several local news anchors, another man added. We could get excellent coverage. Daniel listened to their enthusiastic plans, occasionally offering gentle guidance to keep the focus on the children and families who would benefit, rather than on himself. As the evening wound down, Sebastian approached Daniel one last time. The young waiter's expression had lost its earlier shame and settled into something more thoughtful. Dr. Matthews, I'll understand if you say no, but the foundation you mentioned, do you ever need volunteers? I'm studying hospitality management, but I've been thinking about how I might use those skills differently. Daniel studied the young man, seeing not the dismissive waiter from earlier, but someone capable of growth and reflection. We're always looking for people who understand the importance of making others feel valued. Come by next Tuesday. Ask for Maria in volunteer services. Sebastian nodded gratefully. I will, and I'm truly sorry about tonight. We all make mistakes, Daniel replied. It's what we learn from them that matters. As Daniel finally prepared to leave, Anthony Reeves handed him a small frame. Inside was the napkin, the original coffee shop napkin with Daniel's first sketches of the surgical technique that had saved thousands of children. This belongs with you, Reeves said. It's part of your story, not ours. Daniel accepted the gift with quiet appreciation. As he walked toward the exit, every table in the Monarch fell silent once more. Not from shock or embarrassment as before, but from a collective acknowledgement of the man whose unassuming presence had transformed their evening, and perhaps something deeper in themselves. Outside, Daniel took a deep breath of the night air. Tomorrow, the medical journals would announce his new protocol. Children who had been given no hope would suddenly have a chance. That was what truly mattered. But as he walked to his old truck parked between a Ferrari and a Bentley, Daniel couldn't help but wonder if tonight, this unexpected moment of recognition, might help those children in ways he hadn't anticipated. Sometimes the world needed to be reminded that greatness didn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wore a beige t-shirt and waited patiently to be seen. The fundraising gala at the Monarch took place exactly 1 month later. The restaurant had been transformed. White roses adorned every table, soft piano music floated through. The air and photographs of children helped by the NeuroCure Foundation lined the walls. Each image told a story of hope reclaimed, of lives redirected from tragedy toward possibility. Daniel arrived exactly as he had the first night, in simple clothes, driving his old truck. But this time, Eleanor was by his side, stunning in an elegant but understated dress. As they walked in together, every staff member from the busboys to Anthony Reeves himself greeted them with genuine warmth. Sebastian, now volunteering at the foundation 2 days each week, had been given the honor of coordinating the event's service team. He'd embraced the responsibility with unexpected passion, training the staff to focus on making every guest feel equally valued, regardless of appearance or status. The evening raised over $2.3 million for the foundation, far exceeding anyone's expectations. But the true value went beyond the financial support. Throughout the night, Daniel introduced donors to families whose children had been given second chances. These weren't abstract success stories, but living, breathing testaments to what happened when skill met compassion, when innovation refused to accept limitations. As the evening wound down, Richard Thompson tapped a glass for attention. Lucas had come home from Stanford especially for the event, standing tall and healthy beside his father. When my son was diagnosed, Thompson began, a renowned specialist told us to prepare for the inevitable. Those words haunted us until we met Dr. Matthews. He gestured toward Daniel. But what struck me most wasn't just his medical brilliance. It was how he spoke to Lucas, not as a case file or a condition, but as a 10-year-old boy who loved space exploration and terrible jokes. Thompson's eyes swept the room. The miracle wasn't just the surgery. It was being seen as human when the world had reduced my son to a prognosis. After the applause faded, Daniel stepped forward. He rarely gave speeches, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But tonight felt different. "There's a pattern I've noticed in my years of practice," he said. "The children who come to us have often been told what they can't do, what they'll never experience, how limited their futures will be. They've been defined by others' perceptions." He paused, looking around the room filled with people who had once overlooked him. "Sound familiar? We all do this, sometimes without realizing it. We see the surface and assume we understand the depths. We mistake packaging for content." The room had fallen completely silent. "The children we treat teach me something profound every day. They remind me that potential isn't determined by how others see you, but by what you know exists within yourself." Daniel gestured toward Sebastian, who stood straighter at the acknowledgement. "1 month ago, I was ignored in this very restaurant. Tonight, thanks largely to the effort of the same young man who overlooked me then, we've raised millions to help children who have also been written off too quickly." Sebastian's eyes glistened with emotion as Daniel continued. "This isn't a story about me being underestimated. It's about all of us, how quickly we categorize, how easily we dismiss, how readily we accept limitations instead of possibilities." Daniel looked toward the wall of photographs. Each child on that wall was told what wasn't possible. Each family was prepared for tragedy rather than hope. But they refused those limitations. And now their stories continue, full of possibilities no one predicted. He turned back to the assembled guests. "The question isn't whether we judge books by their covers, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to revise those judgments when the story doesn't match our assumptions." The silence that followed felt profound, contemplative. "The next time you encounter someone who doesn't match your expectations," Daniel Lee concluded softly, "remember this evening. Remember that greatness often hides in plain sight, not because it's trying to deceive you, but because true excellence rarely needs to announce itself." As the gala dispersed into the night, conversations hummed with reflection. Guests departed with more than gift bags and good feelings. They left with a subtle shift in perspective. 3 months later, the monarch had undergone a transformation beyond its elegant interior. Anthony Reeves had instituted a new policy. One night each month, the restaurant served a special community dinner where people from all walks of life were welcomed with equal dignity. The meals were prepared with the same care as their most expensive dishes, but offered at whatever price guests could afford, many paying nothing at all. Daniel occasionally attended these dinners, sitting quietly at different tables each time, listening more than speaking. He found that authentic connection flourished when status symbols were set aside, when people met as simply people. Sebastian continued his management studies, but with a redirected focus on healthcare hospitality. His experience at the NeuroCure Foundation had shown him how environments could either heal or harm, how the simple act of making someone feel valued could become part of the healing process itself. As for Daniel, he remained unchanged in many ways, still preferring his comfortable clothes, still driving his old truck, still seeing patients with the same focused attention whether they were the children of celebrities or refugees. The publicity from that night at the Monarch had brought more funding and recognition to the foundation, but it hadn't altered his essential approach to his work or his life. What had changed was something more subtle, a ripple effect spreading outward from that evening at the Monarch. Whenever the story was shared, it prompted a moment of reflection, a quiet reassessment of hasty judgments and overlooked potential. In the end, the most profound changes weren't measured in donations or medical breakthroughs, but in shifted perspectives, in those moments when someone looked past appearances to discover the extraordinary hiding within the ordinary. For true wealth never announces itself with expensive clothing or impressive credentials. It whispers through actions, through compassion, through the quiet dignity of a life spent in service to something greater than oneself. And sometimes it wears a simple beige t-shirt. If you were moved by this story, there's another waiting for you that might touch your heart even deeper. The next one still gives me chills every time I watch it.